Hello and welcome to the Omnex webinar, Assessing Your Cybersecurity Maturity Level, a Government and Industry Priority. Today's webinar is being presented by Mark Tay and Martin Hetwer. Mark is a cybersecurity consultant and instructor for Omnex with over 30 years of experience working in data privacy, information security, and cybersecurity. He has advised several government agencies and private corporations in the USA and internationally on complex data protection strategies, information security, and cybersecurity challenges. Martin Hetwer is the Managing Director of Omnex Europe. He is also the Director of Integrated Management Systems, a Senior Consultant, and Certified Corporate Trainer for Omnex. He is a PMI Certified Project Management Professional and maintains more than 25 professional certifications, including Certified Manager for Quality and Organizational Excellence, Certified Lead Auditor, TISAX Assessor, Intex Automotive Spice Assessor, and Product Safety and Conformity Representative. During this webinar, if you have any questions for Martin or Mark, please enter them in the Q&A box and we will get to them to the best of their ability at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and someone from Omnex will reach out to you with how to access the slides and the recording after the webinar. All right, Mark and Marty, you can take it away.
Thank you, Miles. My name is Mark Atai, and this morning I will be talking to you a little bit about subject area, which is cybersecurity maturity level with Martin, who is online also. In just a minute, I will share my screen with you, and then we'll go to, that's Martin. I will share my screen with you, and then we'll go to what we'll be discussing. So with that waiting, let me share my screen. Just a second here. Okay. Okay, here it is. Okay, good. Do you all see my screen? Let me go back.
We do now. We do now.
You do now.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, Martin. Is there something you want to say briefly before I start discussing what we're going to present this morning?
I'm just going to say welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. Hopefully, the information that you'll take away from today will be value added, and I'd like you to give some praise to Mark and thank him for joining us here today based on his wealth of knowledge and experience. So thank you, everybody, and I'll be quiet until it's my turn to talk again.
All right, thank you, Martin. Thank you as well, and. As Miles said, we'll actually reserve a little bit of time at the end of the presentation so that you can ask questions, and we'll be happy to answer them as many as we can. We'll talk briefly about Omnex. I think Miles presented some slides earlier. If you joined earlier, you have seen a few information about Omnex. It's a training, consulting, and software solution running offices in the USA, Canada, and Mexico, and China, in Germany, India, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Has about 400. What is that? Let's go back. Has 400 standard and customized training courses in business, quality, environmental, food safety, laboratory, and health and safety management systems worldwide. I'm going to move too quickly here. Been operating as a professional service and experience in strategic operations for about 35 years now, with 700 plus employees over 30 countries worldwide. America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And these are the target markets that Omnex operates in: automotive, aerospace, semiconductors, high tech, medical devices, electric, autonomous vehicles, and general manufacturing. And these are the subdivisions of Omnex. I'll go briefly through the services, provide gap analysis, training and personal certification, implementation and coaching, product certification, assessment, engineering design. Okay, this is what we're going to talk to you about today. And we're going to have a brief introduction. We're going to talk about what it is when we're talking about your cybersecurity maturity level, what it is and how do you assess it? How do you measure what matters in cybersecurity? It's not as easy as you may think, because there's not a real standard for how you measure and what you measure. As a matter of fact, I'll show you a slide where one of the reference organization, NIST, is now actually trying to provide guidance about how you measure and what matters when you measure cybersecurity. We're not going to talk about compliance today with industry requirements. We're going to talk about compliance with government regulations, government frameworks, cybersecurity frameworks and standards. Those give us a good way of measuring your compliance, because as you know, when government puts out a framework and wants people to comply to it, they are pretty rigorous. So we've chosen 6 cybersecurity standards and frameworks: ISO 27001, TISAX, CMMC 2.0, FedRAMP, SOC 2.0, and GDPR. We have a brief conclusion at the end. Okay, I think unless Martin wants to add something to this, I think Miles have gone through this, including mine. So let's get to it. All right. We're going to basically talk briefly about this phrase that I'm showing you on the screen. You can't manage what you can measure. It's by Peter Drucker. Some of you have heard of him or know him. He's a very well-known management consultant. And the reason why we start with this phrase is because it kind of gets to the core of what we are talking about today. What do you measure, and how do you measure it? Because you can manage anything cybersecurity if you can measure it. There are a whole bunch of ways to measure your maturity, from the old ways of testing your cybersecurity, old ways of determining your risks, to these days, companies are coming up with very sophisticated KPI measures to kind of know where you are in terms of maturity level. Today, we're going to focus on government frameworks and government regulations. That will give us a good way of knowing if most of you, I think, will most likely deal with government regulations and frameworks. So we're going to focus on that today and tell you what it is involved into measuring your maturity level. So what is your strategy? Do you have one strategy for security? Do you know your biggest risks? And what should you focus on in terms of your effort? Maturity assessment basically is a gap analysis of where you are today, where you want to be, depending on whether it's just an internal measure of your protection efforts against cybersecurity attacks, or you want to basically comply to a government framework or regulation. So the maturity level assessment is basically a way of knowing where you are today, where you want to be. It's that simple. I was talking earlier about this measuring individual components. And by the way, this is coming from I referred to NIST earlier. This is coming from its publication 855, revision 2. And just to tell you how how new this is, they are still working at it. The latest revision, I think, came in October or November, and it's still in the works because there's really no consensus on how you measure and what you measure. And in this publication, they are talking about it's best to basically measure your system overall ability instead of measuring components here and there. It's best to measure your system overall ability, and that provides you a more robust way of a maturity level. Okay, I'm gonna call on Martin, my friend Martin, to start his presentation with ISO 27001, version 2022. Martin, please take it away.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. So, we had the last 27001 standard that came out that came out a number of years ago. They've obviously refreshed that standard, and just last month they came out with the 2022 version. Interestingly enough, in terms of the requirements for information security, they've added a couple of terms. One is cybersecurity, and the other is privacy protection. And so if we look into other related standards, for instance, there is a cybersecurity standard 21434 for automotive. And there is, of course, GDPR requirements for and other national requirements for privacy protection. One of those things, or both of those things, are addressed not only here in 27001, but also in TISAX. And so we're going to talk a little bit about TISAX today and the requirements that are being pushed forward by your automotive partners to get certified or have your information security management system certified to a specific label number for TISAX. So, Mark, could you go ahead, please? Cycle for me. All right. So, who determines what security means? Well, it's really up to the organization to decide what is secure. What does that mean to us, right? Now, we can use a basic standard or a pre-formatted standard, a set of requirements that can help us with that. ISO 27001, which is our latest security management system standard, has a number of controls. We'll talk about those controls and implementing those controls to make sure that our assets remain secure. Next slide, please. So, first thing that the organization needs to do is determine its organizational assets that require protection. For instance, our intellectual property or property owned by customers, obviously our financial information, right? Or if we've developed our own code and architecture, we want to make sure that that information remains confidential. Personal data. We know we could run into a lot of compliance or legal issues if personal data were to be lost or corrupted or nefariously stolen at some point. Our product designs are very important, or those designs that we co-engineered with our customers and our partners, our trade secrets. And then, of course, our organizational knowledge, that's knowledge that we need to continue to do business. Mark, please go ahead. So Annex A in the latest version of ISO 27001 has 93 separate controls. Now Annex A has been reformatted here into 4 categories: organization, people, physical, and technology. And so those 93 controls need to be spread across the organization. Now, I'm not saying that this is an ideal view of things, but let's just, we'll talk about some commonalities here. So what is the role of the IT department or the information security function within the organization? What's the role of development teams or the operations center? What about human resources, purchasing, and legal? What are their, what requirements impact them? And so if we look down here in terms of the information security assessment or the TISAX controls, There's 41 organizational controls, and then we have 27 for prototype, and then we have 4 for personal protected information. Next slide, please, Mark. And so, yeah, the takeaway from that is that these controls, can you go back one? Sorry. These controls overlap one another. And so, again, it's not an ideal situation, but at some point, the implementation team needs to have some type of RASIC chart that shows who's kind of responsible for those and what those overlapping items are. And so if we look at those, we would say that our information security team, can have as many as 80 different controls. The same thing with our operations team or our development teams. We're talking about 42 controls, because we're also talking about competence and awareness. HR may be as many as 36 different controls that they're into. The point here is that we have to have a multidisciplinary team when we are implementing our information security management system controls, and those that are required by TISAX. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. And so here we see a general outline of what a process map might look like for our information security management system. And so regardless of the number of processes that we end up with, top management has an obligation to assign process owners to each of these processes. And so we've listed here, some of the more general processes, for instance, risk management, continual improvement, internal audit management review. All of those are common processes. Now we just need to determine who the process owners are for that. The major portion here of this process map in the center is all about risk assessment. And we could we can also take some cues from ISO 31000 in terms of what we need to do for risk treatment and preventive actions for those risks and opportunities that are discovered. Please, again. All right. So information security management system is the foundation for effective controls for cybersecurity and for personally protected information. So you can't really get certified to a TISAX label without having an information security management system at its basis. Where else would you attach the controls to if it weren't for certain policies and procedures on how we're going to operate our management system? We know that all management systems has an obligation from leadership to integrate those together. So whether that's quality management, or whether it's environmental, health and safety, laboratory management system, or in this case, information security, there is an obligation for top management to integrate those requirements into the business management system. And so if we look at ISO 27001 and TISAX, they're very much similar to the high-level structure for ISO 9001. And we know that many organizations, or most organizations that provide a product or service, have a requirement to be certified to ISO 9001. For those that are in aerospace, or in this case, automotive, IETF, if you look at the IETF standard, it says for the majority of those things to refer back to ISO 9001. And the same thing applies here. If we want to look at TISAX controls, that tells us to refer back to ISO 27001. So just like we have for our quality management system requirements, we have the same kind of outcome or intent for our information security management system, and more importantly, the controls. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick view, an example of a generic process map. And what we've done here in the blue shades is that we've added next to the reference from the ISO 27001, the TISAX controls. So we can see that in a number of cases for our management system, that TISAX controls reflect the same or very similar controls that are in 27001. And so it's really up to the company to figure out how we want to align and integrate these activities together. Next, please. We mentioned TISAX. Well, what is it? Well, it is a powerful tool to help us understand and prevent the loss of assets. And so what are the threats? What are assets that need protection? What are our vulnerabilities? And then we have to identify, analyze, and more importantly, treat the risk. To protect those items, those assets, and to prevent the loss of those assets in terms of its confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Next, please, Mark. Why is the information security important to the OEMs? Well, they want to make sure that our partners or their partners in the development of their products and services have a system to protect not only their information, but also any designs or prototypes or any other information that's shared by them. Is it mandatory? Yeah, TISAX is mandatory. We're seeing those letters going out from especially the German OEMs to their suppliers saying, hey, you need to be certified, and you need to be certified to a specific label number, whether that's an AL2 or an AL3, there would be something there. Mark will talk a little bit more about maturity levels and the differences here. And then if we look at the IETF requirements for many of us that are certified to IETF, there's also a clause in there for contingency plans. And what does that say? Well, the contingencies say refer back to ISO IEC 27001. So they are tied together. TISAX 27001 and customer specific requirements are all tied together. Now, basically, when did we alert the organization to that? Well, that's the question. Are we late to the party, or are we well ahead of the game? Sorry, can you go back to the next one? Thank you. There is a free download from the VDA or the ENX for the information security assessment that's out there. And basically, it's an Excel workbook, a set of questions that have requirements that need to be fulfilled by a multidisciplinary team. And there's essentially in that workbook 3 tabs. There's information security, data protection, and prototype protection. And so we need to find out what the scope is in terms of our information security assessment. Next one, please. All right, so when we're doing a TISAX security assessment, when we look at our processes and our policies and our procedures, we have to figure out what the maturity level is. Well, if it's incomplete, it's a 0. If it's a performed, it's a 1. If it's managed, it's a 2. The target is that it's established. At least the minimum target is that those processes and procedures have been established for not only the TISAX controls, but also for the information security management system. Now, you may have loftier goals. You may want to have a system that is predictable, or you may want to have a system that is optimized. But at least at the beginning, we want to make sure that our established targets are met. Next, please. Here we see in the information security workbook, the different types of areas or the chapters where we do our assessment, whether that's in incident management or human resources or access management or compliance. Different parts of the organization will have different requirements. We see here from this spider chart or this radar chart that the minimum level is set at a level 3. You can see that. And so the point here, the takeaway here is that we're going to have a bunch of different departments, a bunch of different people working on to achieve these maturity levels. Next, please. Inside this Excel workbook that we have from ENX and from the VDA, there's a number of questions or control questions. There are some questions that must be met, and there are some that say they should be adopted. It's really up to the organization to figure out how to do that. There are objectives for each control question. For each of those 72 or 93 different controls, there are objectives for each of those. And so we need to focus on the intent. There are also additional requirements for those items that have very high protection needs, for instance, personal protected information, and those things that have high protection information, for instance, prototypes and the designs of prototypes. Next, please. The information security assessment, or the ISA, again, as I said, has must and should requirements. So the team has to review those requirements and make sure that all the musts are covered, that they are established, right? And there are 3 essential areas that we need to consider. The first one is confidentiality. The next is integrity of information, and the third is availability of information. So we could, by short form, we call it the CIA for a memory tool. Some of those controls, right, or some of those different aspects, they have very high protection needs. Again, personally protected information, or high protection needs. That might be information related to the product design or prototypes. So we need to look at those and take a special care to make sure that we have the right controls to protect our assets and those of our customers. Next, please. So first thing starts off is what are our external needs and what are our internal wants for our information security management system? And so what level are we at? Obviously, level 1 and 2 is not going to get us where we need to be. And so level 3 is the expected level. And so knowing what the customer and the OEM wants and what we want internally will determine what we need to do in terms of implementation. Next one, please, Mark. And so there's a very simplified approach here to doing that. The first thing is to understand the requirements. And the second part is to start implementing our information security management system. So Omnex can help you with training, not only both in with the TISAX requirements and the TISAX controls and figuring out your maturity levels, but also a kind of holistic training around the information security management system, the requirements, and the new Annex A, which just came out last month. We will help the organization implement and get certified to those standards. At some point, the organization, based on what the needs of the customer are, is you're going to have to register with the ENX and set up an assessment. Hopefully, at some point, you're going to get on your plan or on your schedule the actual assessment for a prescribed assessment label and level. And if you are successful, you will be registered on the ENX exchange. If, however, there are issues that are found during the assessment, if there are weaknesses or if there are some gaps there, we will help. We will help you audit the system, and we'll help you implement those controls and close those corrective actions to ensure that you meet your required goals and your customer goals to get your certification label. Next, please, Mark.
Oh,
and that's it. Yeah,
that's
no,
it,
you're
Martin. Good. All right.
Yeah, that's it for me.
All right. I'm going to take it over from Martin. Thank you very much, Martin. And it's really just a continuation of what you'll be talking about. We're going to emphasize on some of these frameworks in the US. But I think we said earlier in our introduction that whether it is here in the US or in Europe or anywhere else, when you are talking about cybersecurity, there is basically a thread throughout all these frameworks or standards. Relies on the protection of your own data, protection of data of your clients. How do you safeguard confidential and valuable information that you share with the government or any other entity? How do you protect your clients' information? So those frameworks are all, even though they are labeled differently, they all rely on the same base, with protection and safeguarding and proving that you are actually doing them. We're going to start with CMMC 2.0. It's actually not a new framework. It has its predecessors. There was a CMMC 1.0, and there is actually other regulations that kind of come from all the government, and this one is actually specific to DoD, but it is a combination of some of the frameworks that you probably know already. Just gonna go on. Basically, this is a framework that most defense DoD contractors and subcontractors have to be certified by. Now, some of these, there are 3 levels of certification. We'll talk about them just in a minute. Some of them don't require any kind of third-party certification. You can just basically go into a system and say that you are basically acknowledging that you are making sure that the information, if it's just contract information, is following procedures about protecting contract information and all those things. We'll talk about them in a second. For CMMC, there are 2 main objects that you need to basically be concerned about. One of them is called federal contract information, FCI. It's basically to make sure that if you are dealing with the DoD, any relevant information in the contract is protected from unauthorized access. And then the major one is called CUI. That's where you actually, we're going to see in a minute that, especially if you are dealing with CUI, it's called Control on Classified Information. And in that CUI, you are dealing with classified national security information. Then it becomes a little bit more difficult to just say that, you know, we are doing fine, we are making every progress in protecting information. At that point, you need an audit by a third party. You're going to see that in a minute. Okay, these are the three levels that of compliance that I talked about earlier. The very basic one, which is called foundational, at number one, where I mentioned that you basically have to go into a system called SPRS and say that you are doing everything fine. It's a self-assessment. You do need to answer a few questions about what you're doing, but nobody is going to send an auditor to your organization to check, to make sure that things that you're saying you are doing, you're actually doing them. But you can be, you know, just like any other government agency, you can have somebody just ask you a few more questions about what you are saying you are actually assessing. But it's just 7 controls, not a big deal. And at this point, you are just dealing with information about contracts. The second level, which is level 2, is a little more advanced, where you are dealing with FCI and CUI information. And at this stage, these two is divided into 2 levels. Basically, you are either dealing with critical national security information, or you are not. And if you are not dealing with critical security information, then you can self-assess, just like on number 1. But it has several more controls. Number 1 has 17 controls, and number 2 has all the NIST 800 171 controls. I don't know if some of you are familiar with those controls. Plus 61 info controls. And if you are dealing with national security information, then they're going to require that you bring in an assessor. You bring in a third-party assessor to actually certify that you're actually dealing with these controls carefully and rigorously. The last one, which is number 3, is what they call the expert level, where in addition to the 110 controls of NIST 171, they have added the controls of NIST 800 172, and only the DoD can control those procedures. They either sending their own assessors, or they have contractors that are coming on behalf of the DoD to assess you. All right, just quickly, we talked about how do you become compliant. It is not a difficult process, but it is a rigorous process. You have to do a gap analysis. You have to basically, after you do the gap analysis of where you are and where you want to be, you need to basically close the gap if there are any, and you need to do a pre-assessment, and then after the pre-assessment, you do a final assessment to be compliant. Now, I will talk about this briefly at the end, but there are some late news about Omnex, which has actually acquired certain certifications. I'll talk about them at the end of the presentation, talking about CMMC 2.0. Okay, that's just CMMC briefly. I'll move to FedRAMP. A lot of you have probably heard about FedRAMP because it deals with something that most of us use these days, which is clouds, right? If you want to put your the government information into the clouds, then you need to adhere to certain procedures and regulations that the FedRAMP, the government wants you to know about. And how do you become compliant to FedRAMP is very, very explicit. It's not a difficult thing to do, but it is, you do need to go through the steps of getting compliant. FedRAMP is just basically stands for Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. Again, just know that this is the Fed regulations that deal with cloud management and cloud data. Not to make sure that the way you are putting data into the cloud is following certain standard approaches to security. It's monitoring basically the security that you actually put into the cloud. So if you want to put the government or any data into the cloud, there's actually a NIST standard 800, which is a very robust standard to adopt. You need to be compliant with that to actually deal with any government data that you put into the cloud. There are 4 phases that you need to go through when you want to be authorized to deal with FedRAMP. Document your processes. You assess your processes. By the way, these are not anything new, really, when you deal with cybersecurity, right? These are things that we know dealing with cybersecurity for years. The foundation is always to document what you are doing, to assess what you are doing, to make sure that whether it's a self-assessment or a third-party assessment, you seem to assess to make sure that things that you're saying you are doing them. And you need to have somebody authorized your procedures to make sure that they are actually running and they're actually working. And as you know, in cybersecurity, there's no such thing as a static process, right? You need to monitor the process, you need to continue doing what you're doing, because it's something that never stops, right? The threat never stops, the risk never stops. So you need to continually monitor them. Okay, a few domains here that you need to follow if you want to be compliant with FedRAMP, to make sure that you manage your access control, awareness and training, probably a key component in every cybersecurity framework or standard. Audit, assessment and authorization, configuration management, contingency planning. You see those things in pretty much all frameworks, whether it is the US or in Europe or anywhere else, and then incident response. SOC, SOC 2, there is a SOC 1. Some of you who are familiar with SOC, you know that there is a SOC 1, and then we're gonna only deal with SOC 2 in this presentation. It is basically a framework that certified public accountants have put together to make sure that companies are protecting their clients' data. One of them, SOC 1, is actually make sure that they protect financial data, and SOC 2 has to do more with storing customer data. It is an easy framework to comply with, but you still need to do it because you still need to actually get an auditor to come in and make sure that you are complying with those frameworks. Some of these steps just show you how to prepare for an audit of SOC 2, right? You need to basically look at your business, the way you are dealing with your clients' data, making sure that your policy is in place. Whenever you're talking about cybersecurity, you know that policy comes first. You need to specify those procedures into a policy that everybody knows, everybody can see, everybody can read, everybody's aware about. And you need to know whether you are dealing with type 1 or type 2 SOC report. There are some of the requirements, even when Martin was talking about 27001 and TISAX, we've seen some of these security provisions: security, privacy, confidentiality, processing, integrity, availability. They're all, these are the foundation, right, of cybersecurity. They're all there. Some of them differ from country to country, or from framework to framework, or from standard to standard. But there is a foundation to all these, which is confidentiality, availability, privacy, and security. You have them in all of them. Some of the things that you need to do to buying across organization, leadership, define audit scope, policies and processes, they're all the same in most frameworks that we talk about. The policies also, I'm going to move on. Okay, to GDPR. Martin has touched on this in his presentation. And the reason why GDPR is important is because it touches a lot of countries and a lot of companies. Even though it's a European Union regulation, it doesn't stop in Europe or anywhere close to Europe. It goes everywhere. Let me just show you what it stands for. It's just data protection, right? You need to make sure that if you are dealing with clients that are in Europe, it doesn't have to be that you actually live in Europe. Your company basically is physically in Europe. As soon as you deal with any European countries, whether it's a client, whether it's customer data, whether it is basically selling cars or selling clothes, or just have a website that touches any part of Europe, you need to comply with this. This is why it is very, very wide ranging, and it comes with very stringent regulations and very stiff fines. If they find you not compliant, the fines are quite stiff. So a lot of companies, even in here in the US, are taking note of this GDPR regulation. They want to be compliant because they don't want to be fined. They don't want to be not compliant and basically levied with a big fine. It's what I was just saying, that it's a bounding regulation that comes with very, very heavy fines if you're not compliant. It goes from automobiles, autonomous cars, to driving habits, billing details, your phone, text messages. And just in a minute, we'll see what data it covers. Here it is: your name, phone number, email address, your postal code, your passport, driving license, bank account numbers, credit cards and debit cards, pretty much everything that identifies a person or a client or a company. They want to make sure that you protect these. And in some cases, they actually need to know that the customer is aware of this, and the customer has actually decided to opt out of it. And if they do opt out of it, you have no business keeping this data for them. Okay, who needs to be compliant? Almost every organization that deals or collects information from any person in the European Union. And that's a lot of companies, even here in the US or everywhere else in the world. That's a lot of companies that deal with European Union data. People in Europe and everywhere else connected to Europe. So they need to be GDPR compliant. How do you become compliant? Or how to become compliant, I should say here. You need to basically make sure that you know what data you're dealing with, okay? Because there is a list of data that I showed you earlier. You need to know what data you're dealing with. You need to know how basically that data impacts people in Europe. In service, website or application. I mean, there is a story that I think is Google that has so many engineers dedicated to becoming compliant or to make sure that Google is compliant with GDPR, because as I mentioned earlier, the fines are pretty stiff. So it touches a lot of parts of people in Europe, a lot of companies in Europe, a lot of just regular people who are going to get insurance, for example. I mean, you need to make sure that you control these type of information from the person. You need to make sure they are aware that this information can be used. As I said, if you export data from the EU, if you need a compliant mechanism to cover the transfer data, such as model clauses, you need to make sure that if you need someone called a lead data protection authority, DPA, you do have them because they are considered experts, specialists in covering everything about GDPR. So you need to get one if you think you do need one. Just going very quickly here, and we are getting close to the time. Okay, just a few words to conclude this presentation. A few words that are I think important, because everywhere you go these days, company executives want to reassure the employees, the customers, and the stakeholders that they are putting appropriate safeguards for their assets, not only their assets themselves, but the customers' assets. And if you are dealing with the government, government's assets, right, government information, all right. So as the threats for cyber criminals and grow in scales, organizations needs to show that they're, confidently that they have actually a maturity level in how to protect against cybercrime, against cyber attacks, and not only about how to protect, but if they do get hacked or they do get attacked, they know how to get back onto their feet in a very confident and professional way. This is what I was talking about earlier, that Omnex has not only started helping for quite some time here. I think Marty mentioned that briefly, that Omnex can handle data audit issues about already TISAX and ISO 27001 and GDPR, by the way. I think Martin mentioned that. In addition to that, recently, Omnex has been certified as a registered practitioner organization for CMMC. That's the badge right down there. Has also on site a license an RP, which is a registered practitioner, and can provide training for CMMC 2.0. So those are three certifications that Omnex has acquired just very recently. We're already licensed to provide training, but the last two are quite recent. So that's a great achievement. I think we are at the end. I think I want to leave. I don't know how many minutes for Miles to talk briefly about. I think 2 or 3 slides at the end. Hey, Miles, are you there? Miles, are you there? Okay, Miles is not there. Martin.
Yeah, sure. Let me talk a little bit about these things. So thank you, Mark. I appreciate the information that you delivered today. One of the things with Omnex is that, we did talk about the 5 or 6 target markets that we work in: automotive, aerospace, semiconductor, general manufacturing, medical devices, those types of things. But we also support a number of different standards that we call here the 7 levers. So whether it's a quality management system and IETF for aerospace, or in this case for automotive, ISO 6 or IETF 16949. We also have experts here, a great number of experts with ISO 26262 functional safety and SOTIF. We have a number of assessors here for automotive spice. We're also tied very closely with a sister company, Omnix Systems, that provides an enterprise-wide quality information suite of softwares for different industries, different applications. So if you're interested in any software demos, please look us up and ask for a demo. Supply chain practices, we have a lot of background in supply chain practices. And with regards to what we just discussed today, there's a lot of upcoming public training here in terms of different standards for in this case, information security, TISAX, and CMMC professional, and cybersecurity are all coming up as well too here in January and March. So you're more than welcome to register for those.
I think that's about it, right, Martin? So this
Yeah,
is just a list of automotive cybersecurity classes coming up again for Omnix. Go ahead, go ahead, Martin. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we've just had one question here. Does anybody have any questions for us? Happy to help, happy to answer, happy to provide some support, feedback, opinions,
Sure.
General comments.
No questions.
No questions. Well, we'll give it another minute, and then if there's no questions, then we'll sign off. So none so far. Okay, thank you.
All right. We thank you very much for participating and listening to us. I hope we're able to give you a little insight on how you actually measure your maturity level in cybersecurity. If you have any additional questions later on, feel free to put them into the chat room, and we'll make sure we answer them and get back to you. Thank you very much. Have a nice rest of the day.
Yeah, reach out anytime you need. You have any questions or any help. We're always here. We're always available to help. So thank you.
Thank you.
And don't forget about your European operations. So we manage our operations from Germany. So if you need anybody in Europe or Central Europe or Eastern Europe, all the way to Morocco, you let us know. Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.